competency mapping process, we were discussing a number of steps, and then first few steps we had discussed, where we talked about identifying the indicators, then giving a definition, and then for each one of them looking at what are the roles that you are going to play. So, the role holders, and then see that what is the what should be the proficiency level of that person in that particular role related to the various competencies, whether it is related to genetic, functional or managerial and behavioral, sorry, not genetic, but generic. Okay. So, with this description we move further to look at other steps that is involved. So, once we have identified these things, okay, so these are the different roles and this is the proficiency level that is required. Then we move to the next stage of discussion, that is identifying the functional skill roles, right. And here what we are going to do, we are going to see we are going to define the functional and technical skills. Before that we have identified generic skills and behavior indicators, right, the conceptual skills. Then we move further to define other skills, that is functional and technical skills, because this skill is very important. And once we go about defining these skills are the competencies which is required to perform the job effectively, and again here we are going to provide definitions, right. So, say for example, here you will find a list of competencies that is mentioned, like his selling skills, distribution and expansion, RPS, okay. Then RS management, that is related to softwares, then financial management, financial commitment management, then product knowledge, market knowledge, trade relations, analytical skills. So, if you look at these skills or other skills, so what you need to do is that once these skills are identified, what you are going to do is that you are going to define each of these skills, right. Because unless you have a description, you will not be able to move to define the level of this skill that would be required by the individual to perform their job effectively. So, you have to identify what do you mean by selling skills. Okay. So, you have to be very clear about it. So, you have to expand this steps of selling calls, this all, I mean, whatever processes are required as a part of the selling skills, that is to be defined clearly. Say for example, distribution expenses, enhanced coverage in a definite budget, right. Then availability and visibility, merchandising. So, in that way you go about defining each and every functional competencies. For example, say product knowledge. Okay. So, it means that he should have a basic understanding of the various products that is being sold by the company. Not only his the product knowledge about his company, but also product knowledge about the competitors, right. So, that he can convince customers to sell the product. Similarly, he should have market knowledge. Market knowledge means that he should know about the geography of the area where he is going to sell the product. Okay. What kind of relationship is to be established with the, say, dealers, stockers and others, so that he can maintain good relationships. Unless he have market knowledge, he will not be able to go ahead. So, these are the competencies which makes his job effective, right. Then he should be aware about the trade relations, that how to maintain relationship with retailers, stockers, okay, and others, and that is probably is going to leverage the sales. Okay. Then he should be able to see that how he is going to sell his product into different territories. Okay. So, how he is going to align that. Okay. And so, going to look into the coverage part, that what are the areas that is to be covered, how is going to coordinate and integrate his activities within the area, right. So, these are the various skills that would be required, and each of them is going to be defined very clearly, because unless you are able to define competencies, not only this competency, but all competencies related to these three categories that we have started, say generic, behavioral and also this technical functional competencies, and in some cases where it is required managerial competencies also. So, once competencies are identified, it is defined and the proficiency level is looked into, then we move further, right. So, now then we identify role for each role holders, right. It means that you are going to say that okay, these are the competencies related to technical, functional, managerial and generic competencies. Okay. So, you are going to display all the competencies along with the description or definitions, so that the person know that okay, in order to achieve superior performance, these are the competencies and this is the level of competencies that would be required by the each stakeholder. Okay. And once you have done this, you move to the next part, that is assessing his behavioral skills, because you remember you are not going to only confine to technical skills or his generic skills, but you also move to discuss about his behavioral skills, and that is where you are going to identify or assess his behaviors which is required for effective performance. Okay. So, now if you look at behavioral skills, there are a number of tools and techniques that could be used to assess his behavior, and then his behavior would be compared with one who has a superior performance, or you can even follow the job description model if it is required. So, for example, for a salesperson, you know that customer satisfaction is of prime importance. So, you are going to use a tool to assess whether the customers are satisfied or in what way is going to satisfy his customers. So, there are certain tools that could be used. Okay. This is software basically eco which can be used. Then you are also going to use certain psychometric tests okay, in order to identify his interest, his attitude, his interpersonal skills, his communication skills. So, because this is going to be part of your behavioral skills. So, you are also going to use certain psychometric tools. The idea of using these psychometric tests is that you probably will be able to assess his behaviors, his soft skills, and the extent to which it is going to contribute to what you call the performance of the individual. Now, when we are talking about psychometric tests or tools that you are going to use, make sure that it is relevant, it is contextual, and actually it helps the assessor to identify the relevant behavioral skills which is required for effective selling. Now, when we are going to talk about psychometric tests or tools, you also need to look into the properties, whether they are reliable and valid or not. Okay. What are the norms against which you are going to compare it. So, make sure that you are going to use a psychometric test based on certain criteria. It means they must have a norm, they must be reliable, and they must have a validity. Okay. So, unless these three things are not there, you should not go about using these tests. And then you know that psychometric test is always used by a person who is expert in not administration and interpretation of these kind of tests. Okay. So, most of the time you will find that a behavioral scientist or psychologist is involved in these kind of activities. So, whenever you are going to use these psychometric tests, make sure that it is used by an expert who know how to administer and interpret it, and you also look into the reliability, validity and the norms issues, right. So, psychometric tests are very, very important, that is to be used. You can also use certain questionnaire to assess behaviors, right. So, you identify those behaviors and then you develop a scale, a rating scale to measure his behavior, and that would probably help you to see that whether the behaviors which is required by the individual is present and the level to which it is present. Because if you are using rating scales, probably you will be able to assess the extent to which that particular behavior, a specific behavior is present in the individual. So, for example, you want to measure assertiveness. So, if you are to measure assertiveness in the individual, because it is one of the behaviors that is required by the individual, right, to be effective. So, when you are going to measure effectiveness, first of all you are going to select a tool which is going to be relevant in the context of the sales people, and then you also look into the psychometric properties, because if you do not look into psychometric property, probably it will not be good. So, you are going to see whether this test has been reliable and valid or not, and similarly what are the norms for comparing the score of the individual. Okay. Since you are using competency mapping, so what you are going to do is that you are going to set these norms at a bit higher level to ensure that these behaviors are reflected by the individual, and then you are going to use a questionnaire, that is a behavioral questionnaire, to measure assertiveness. So, you are going to develop a rating scale which probably help you to identify the extent to which the person is assertive or not, and whether this level of assertiveness is required for the job or not. Okay. So, you identify the level of assertiveness that is required, you measure the assertiveness level, so that you can see the extent to which this particular behavior skill is present in the individual. Okay. Moving further, you can also measure like interpersonal relationship, his activity, his motivation. So, these are some of the you can say skills that would be required for the individual, which comes under the behavioral skills, and there are different kind of skills, rating skills can be used, or some other techniques can also be used if you really want to measure the behavioral skills of the individual, right. Or another important thing that you can go even for measuring personality, because personality of the sales people is very, very important. Personality does not mean only about the physical makeup of the individual. Personality is a unique combination of both the physical characteristics and also the psychological characteristics. okay, because this personality actually is defined as a psychophysical makeup of an individual, which consists of certain personality physical characteristics as well as psychological characteristics, right. So, you also need to measure personality under the behavioral scales. So, you have to see what are the relevant dimensions. In one case probably it is identified that okay, these are several dimensions, there could be several dimensions, but there are 10 dimensions which have been identified as relevant and important in the case of sales people, which need to be measured, right. Look at these measures. Okay. So, if you look at these measures, you will find that most of these measures have been identified at bipolar dimensions, right, isn't it. So, for example, introversion versus extroversion. Okay. So, what kind of qualities would be required for a sales people, right? The level at which this personality dimension would be required. So, you have a scale moving from introvert to extrovert. So, suppose you have a scale and here you are moving here and you are going to be introvert, okay, 0, and then you are going to be here an extrovert, right. So, here you are introvert and here you are extrovert, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It has to be an equal appearing interval scale, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, sorry 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now, if you have this kind of scale, so you are going to measure, and this is one of the personality dimension, and accordingly you can think about all personality dimensions that is mentioned. So, you have to see that what is the proficiency level that is required. It means that a sales people have to be more extrovert. So, the acceptable level is say 4 or somewhere in between 3 to 4. If you are very highly extrovert, that is also not good. So, somewhere it is going to be, this is the what you call proficiency level that is required. Now, this is the proficiency level that is required, and then you are going to assess this that particular individual on this personality dimension, and suppose you find that he is here, he is here or he is here. Suppose there are 3 individuals, it means the gap is this one, right, that needs to be fulfilled, and this proficiency level is standardized based on outstanding performer. Similarly, you are going to look into other dimensions like anxiety and relaxation. Okay. These again there are 2 bipolar dimensions. Okay. If you are totally relaxed or you are too anxious, probably it is not good. Okay. So, third dimension like being assertive or questioning every time, right. Then receptive or keeping a distance, right. You are very much receptive to others or you keep a distance or safe distance, right. You are very rigid or improvised, right. Then intellectual dynamism, right, whether you always conform to certain things or you try to be deviating from them or having a different opinion altogether, right. Otherwise, combative or concile, right, you not concile, but you conciliate, right. So, these are the personality dimensions which have been identified as relevant in the case of sales people. So, you are going to use this kind of scale, right, to measure the personality level, and then you create a profile of the individual based on this personality. Okay. And but before that you identify a standard personality profile, and that should be based on the required proficiency level on these personalities of an outstanding performer. Okay. So, once that kind of profile is created, so you know that okay, this is the behavioral profile that we are looking forward to. Once you assess that, considering the reliability, validity, other things of the scale is good, then you can be sure that if it is matching with the individual concerned, then you can say that this salesperson has all the qualities to be called as a competent person, and then he is going to be an outstanding performer, right. But there could be still be some gap between whether he is likely to be or whether he is going to be, right, and that you come to know only after some time. But once you measure it and you find that he has these qualities, you may be assured that okay, this person is likely to be a good salesperson and he is going to be an effective performer, right. So, what I mean to say here is that you are going to measure these behavioral skills as well, similar way that you have measured functional competence and also generic competence. Okay. Now, once you have done that, you are also going to talk to the supervisors, because supervisor is going to help you to identify certain other skills related to performing his job. So, it could be related to functional skills or it could be related to technical skills, functional technical skills, or it could be related to behavioral skills as well. Okay. So, you also need to consult the line managers when you go for it, because he would be in a position to provide you better feedback, and that is why you know that when you are going to use or assess these skills, you are not going to use only questionnaires, surveys or observations, but you also use critical incidents, right. You also use 360-degree feedback. So, under the category of 360-degree feedback, you can also get information from his line managers, his the head of the departments, his fellow colleagues, because they would be able to provide you some data related to the individual, I mean in terms of the kind of the level of competency that person has. Okay. You can include supervisors or head of the department, because they are experienced people, they have been doing or supervising this kind of things, and they can actually demonstrate and see that whether this person is being good in that particular job or not. Okay. And that is where you are going to use 360-degree feedback to assess these kind of skills, and you are going to include here a number of stakeholders apart from the individual itself, could be his supervisors, his subordinates, his peers, or even external customers, suppliers, vendors, right, or retailers who are part of the process or who actually participate in the process, and they can also evaluate the individual. So, that you get a comprehensive picture, right. So, once you have been able to assess all kind of competencies, you move to the next level, and that is you match the role holder versus role based competencies. Okay. Now, what you have done? You have identified these three kind of skills, okay, that is what we call generic, technical and behavioral. Okay. So, you have competencies identified, competencies are identified. Okay. Do not go for too many competencies, you see look into those critical competencies and how important they are. Okay. That was the two criteria, remember we talked about in order to identify these competencies. So, once you have been able to identify role competencies related to particular job, what you are going to do is you are going to see whether what is the proficiency level that is required and what is the actual proficiency of the person concerned whose competency is measured. Okay. So, the proficiency level that is required and actual proficiency, and whether it is matching or not. So, you are going to match it, okay. And that is what I mean by this when saying that matching the role holder versus role based competency. So, if you are able to match it, you will be able to identify what? The gap in the competencies, right. So, based on this, but before that you have to identify all the competencies, you have to define all these competencies, okay. And the criteria for identifying this is two, that is criticality and importance. And then you are using certain methods to source out these competencies, okay. And then you are going to define them very well, so that when it comes to assessment, then you have benchmark profile that is related to an individual who is a superior performer, and based on this benchmark profile you see that what is the level of proficiency, and accordingly you create the proficiency level a profile. This could be what we call a standard profile, right. So, this standard profile would be used to compare an individual profile, right, to identify the gap. So, once a standard profile is known, then you can see that how it could be used to identify the gap in the competency level, right. And that is where we are going to talk about matching the role holder versus role based competency, right. Now, if you look at this, it is given here. Okay. So, some of the skills which have been measured here, right, at 4 level, that beginning level, development level, confirmed level and the expertise level. So, these are the thing, and this shows the score. So, you are moving from either here to here, and if you look at these are the competencies, for each of the competencies it means you have to see that where you are standing, right. So, for each one of them, so this is the score that you have got, right, you can see, right. So, here it is very high, here it is medium, it is medium, it is medium, it is medium, it is medium. So, this way you can see that where the person stands on this, right. For others you can see work related activities or functional competencies, right. This is how it has been made. Okay. So, the idea here is like say commitment to work, you will find that it is medium here, then workplace autonomy it is here, right. Ability to learn it is here, responsiveness here, but as I told you that once you identify the competencies using different sources of data and using that data to see to see that the level of competencies that is there in the individual, you are going to match them. So, after matching probably you will be able to know the level at which it is there or the level at which it is required. Suppose you find that the competency level is very high, it means that on that particular competency level you do not need to do anything, right. But if it is low, then it means that you have to plan certain interventions for the individual. It could be training and development activities, provided it is related to functional competencies or behavioral competencies. But if it is something else, then you go for coaching and mentoring to ensure that he is able to reach to that competency level, right. Mentoring is have been found very useful here when it comes to improving the competencies, right, because he have already been doing his job effectively. Okay. Similarly, you will find that some others say another important factor. Okay. What is the long term orientation, cooperation, influence. So, you see that where he stands. So, that is how you can see that what is the rate of satisfaction with this particular variable and what is the required level, and accordingly you can identify the gap. So, you will find that when we try to match the role holder and the competencies, that is how we proceed, and this is one way that I have discussed, and another way is that you can manually do it. You can go for identifying all the competencies here and list these competencies, provide a description of definition of all these competencies, right, and then you measure it using a tool that the level of which these competencies are there. In some cases you are going to use assessment centers or 360-degree feedback, some cases you are going to use questionnaires, some cases you may use critical incident techniques. So, depending upon the required what kind of competencies you are going to match, say define, you are going to collect data using different sources. It could be supervisor, it could be 360-degree technique, it could be the individual himself, okay. And then you can go for survey, behavioral event interviews, questionnaires, and all kind of methods could be used to get the data to identify the competencies and also define these competencies. Once competencies are defined, you go for identifying the benchmark or the standard against which it will be compared, and that is here it is very important to see that it is always going to be a superior performer on the job. So, the standard profile is based on this one, right. So, I can link it here. Superior performer is actually the standard profile, and this profile is compared with the actual profile of an individual, whether you are going to measure personality, behaviors, and any kind of skill, generic skill, technical skills and behavioral skills. Probably that would help you to identify the gap in a better way, right. So, once you have been able to identify gap, then the next stage what you are going to do? You are going to look at the action plan. So, what is to be done, okay, in terms of taking certain actions, so that you can be assured that people have those competencies at that particular level. So, we go for talent acquisition. In case of talent acquisition, okay, if you remember, one of the applications of competency mapping is in the selection process. Okay. So, now your criteria or norm for the selection process goes up, okay, because you are going to use a standard profile which is based on superior performance. So, accordingly you are try to identify people who are having those competencies, so that you do not need to plan any intervention at a later stage, because if you are going to hire very competent people, then the need of training other things are not going to be there. So, it is not only going to save you and being cost effective at a later stage, but even you do not need to give him much training and these kind of things, right, because you are already recruiting people or selecting people based on a norm which is much higher level, right. Then you can also see that how you are going to evaluate, because the kind of norm that you are going to identify for selection of the people, that could be the criteria of evaluating people during the interviews. So, in order to judge them, right, and then your interview is basically going to be competency based. Okay. So, that is where you are going to assess whether people have those competencies or not, right. Then you can use certain tests to see whether at what level the person has been able to reach on those competency matrix, and what I have just discussed is the way this is how you are going to create competencies. Competency matrix related to different things, right. Okay. And then other post selection processes is become much easier, because you know that you do not need to plan interventions, it is going to be cost effective, and HR would be in a much better position to do other things, because you are sure that you are going to hire someone who is going to be really good, right, if that happens. Okay. Another important thing is that performance management or talent management. You know that basically you are going to evaluate performance in order to see whether the person has performed well his job or not, right. But if you are going to use a competency based performance management system, then you can see your criteria would be different, and then you are going to see whether the person has reached to that performance level or not. Okay. So, what you are going to see? You are going to see his proficiency level, which is going to be compared with a standard profile, and accordingly you are going to set the target for him, that okay, this is the target based upon the standard profile that you need to meet, right. So, that you can be evaluated later on, right, and that also helps you to identify people with high potential, because if you are able to identify people with growth potential or high potential, you can groom them, you can mentor them to become leaders at a later stage, or you can educate them, you can mentor them, so that they become leaders in the future. Similarly, you can also link it with promotions and other kind of things, right, because if you remember that if you are going to perform well and you have met all those competency criteria, then it can be used for administrative purposes to promote people in the organization and the career. And then you can also think about succession planning. Succession planning means that if you have a structured succession plan, you know that who is going to replace whom and when, based upon matching the competencies. So, if you are looking for a successor for a particular level in a job, then you see that the successor has those quality in terms of competency, and then again you are going to match those competencies in order to ensure that your succession plan is good, right. And ultimately career planning, because you know that high potential or high performing employees will always be moving ahead in the career. So, for that you can have a separate career planning system. For example, you know that many companies today have gone for fast track career growth systems, right. Many IT companies have gone for this. I remember like Infosys, TCS, these companies have a fast track career growth for high performing employees. So, you will find that if you have the potential or the competencies to do well and you have been doing well, and your performance has been superior consistently, then you have better chance to grow in a shorter time of span compared to others in the process who take longer time or who take standard career route to grow and develop in the organization. Similarly, you will find that those people who are not utilized better because of these competencies, you can make better utilization of the people also. Then you can also develop your learning management system, that is training and development activities, right, based on the input. Once you have identified the gap, okay, then you can plan interventions for individual learning as well. Okay. And once you have taken these actions, the last step is to take feedback from the employees, right. You can develop an online system to see whether your competency mapping framework has been good or not, whether you have been able to really identify competencies that is required, which is relevant, critical and important, okay. Whether your definitions of various competencies are good, how the competency mapping exercise is being carried out, how the competency profiling have been carried out, whether the feedback given by different sources and the method of data collection is appropriate or not. So, you can get feedback from the people on all accounts to ensure that the entire competency mapping process is good. Okay. So, you can ask questions like whether what is the whether they have been able to identify the expected competency for the role, okay. Whether they are against it, whether you have done a good 360 appraisal related to getting feedback from the individual. So, this is the summary of the competency maps. Okay. So, what you are going to do is that you are going to identify job for mapping, then the role and responsibilities through job description, then identify a benchmark role, high performing individual, right. Then identify the key competencies related to this, okay. And finally, you give a comprehensive list with the definitions of these competencies. These are the various steps that I have been talking about. Then level of competency for the job, okay. Then measure the competencies and collect data from the sources of individuals doing the job. That is how we proceed. Okay. So, these are the step by step approach that is to be followed, and finally, compare with the benchmark job and identify the gap in the level of competencies required, okay, and then develop an action plan and go for follow up. And that is what we have been discussing as a part of the competency mapping process. Thank you.